do want to thank everyone for joining today. And again, if you have friends, please do feel free and comfortable to introduce them to these virtual gatherings. They are open to all. What I'm going to share is a little bit about Paul, who I've gotten to know and appreciate his role in this community, but also what he's done in over his career, if I can use that term, and over his lifetime, which is to me quite fascinating. And I know that everyone here will find it just as fascinating. So here is a little bit about Paul, just his a bio of sorts. So currently, Paul Rockower is the executive director of the Jcrc of Greater Phoenix, the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Phoenix. He's formerly the executive director of the Levantine Public Diplomacy, which was an independent, and still is, an independent public diplomacy organization. He has managed the U.S. Department of State's American Music Abroad and Next Level programs in dozens of countries around the world, which is quite fascinating, including many countries in conflict. He has partnered with numerous U.S. diplomatic posts to run public diplomacy programs in countries ranging from Algeria to Iraq to Venezuela to Zimbabwe. And he has worked with multiple foreign ministries, including Israel, India, and Taiwan. And we're very fortunate to have him today and share about Jewish public diplomacy, which is something that I think many of us know a little bit about, but don't realize how vital and important it is in the bigger picture of things. And again, if you will have any questions, please do direct them to Paul through the chat in the beginning, and then later you can definitely ask him directly.
Well, shalom, everyone. Thank you for having me. Thank you to Levi, Rabbi Levertov. And we'll, I got a little surprise for him later, but we'll get to that. So before we dive into this discussion, I want to put on a different cap, and that is that of Professor Rockower, because I want to explain a little bit about what public diplomacy is so that we're all on the same page here. So diplomacy and public diplomacy are the antithesis of each other. Diplomacy is very high level, very secretive. It's high level communications from government to government. It's how governments interact with each other. Public diplomacy is just the opposite. It's how governments or communities or NGOs or faith communities communicate with people. It's how countries or communities communicate their policies, their cultures, their values. Public diplomacy is the intersection of communication and policy. It's really the nexus of how we communicate who we are. And so to understand public diplomacy, there's really 5 pillars to it. And I'm just going to go through this quickly, and I'll talk a little bit about some phrases that I'll come back to. But first and foremost, public diplomacy is about listening. It's understanding the audience you're working with. It's understanding what makes other communities tick, or the target audience you're working with. You can't be able to do any kind of advocacy until you understand who you're working with. So first and foremost, the most important thing in any endeavor is listening. Second being advocacy, how we communicate our policies, how we communicate what our interests are, what matters to us. Another aspect of public diplomacy is cultural exchange. This includes things like study abroad. Fulbright, Rotary Foundation does a lot of study abroad. And in the Jewish communal context of this would be things like the American Jewish Committee does a lot of exchanges for public officials. Anti-Defamation League does police exchanges in Israel. Birthright's a great example of cultural exchange for the Jewish community. And there's others. Chabad does a tremendous amount of cultural exchange. We can talk about that later. Cultural diplomacy is the aspect that I have most worked in. I've run cultural diplomacy programs all over the world. I'll share a little bit about that, but it's about that's really about, how you communicate who you are through your intangible heritage. I'll talk a little bit about that as well. In the international context of public diplomacy, the other aspect is international broadcasting. This would be non-commercial outlets, things like Voice of America, the BBC, France 24, Deutsche Welle, Al Jazeera. These are international broadcasting outlets that are removed from the marketplace. These are supported by governments. In our communal context, in terms of Jewish communal public diplomacy, this would be something like the Jewish News, which is it's a nonprofit. It helps tell the story of the Jewish community. So all of this public diplomacy contributes to something called soft power. Soft power is the power of your influence. It's the power of your resources, the power of your institutions, the power of the models that you hold in your community. It's all about the attractiveness of your culture and your values. It's how you can communicate who you are to other communities and get them to connect with you over those intangible resources. Public diplomacy understands that you don't reach people through rational information. You reach people rather through emotional transrational connections that comes through music and food and art and dance and culture. And in terms of advocacy, in the form of storytelling. You know, it's how you connect with people on a deeper transrational level. And I have a background in public diplomacy. I have a master's degree in public diplomacy from the University of Southern California. And my favorite description of public diplomacy comes from a professor there, a gentleman by the name of Professor Manuel Castells, who says, public diplomacy is the projection in the arena of the values and ideas of the public. The aim of the practice of public diplomacy is not to convince, but to communicate, not to declare, but to listen. Public diplomacy seeks to build a sphere in which diverse voices can be heard in spite of their various origins, distinct values, and often contradictory interests. So I'm a practitioner in public diplomacy. That means I do this work on the ground. I've been doing this for years. As Rabbi Levertov mentioned, I started my career working for the Israeli Foreign Ministry. I was the press officer for the Consulate General of Israel to the Southwest during the Second Intifada and the Gaza disengagement. Never an easy time to do media and public diplomacy, but it's, you know, for the state of Israel, it's always something that's valuable and important. I was based in Texas. I was at Houston. I covered a 5-state region of Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and New Mexico. I was the Israeli ambassador to the Republic of Texas. My answering machine, of course, said Shalom y'all, and really got to do a whole lot of work promoting Israel, both, you know, directly dealing with the political issues of that time. And also what my favorite thing was promoting Israel beyond the conflict. So promoting Israel through its democracy, through its diversity, through development. Promoting Israeli cultural diplomacy, such as sharing Druze poetry or bringing Ethiopian Israeli storytellers. And part of, you know, my connection to how I ended up here in the Jcrc, Jewish Community Relations Council, is like when I would have a Ethiopian Israeli filmmaker or storyteller, I would send him to New Orleans, and the Jcrc there would connect him with a Baptist church to tell his story. It's all about, public diplomacy is about storytelling. And one of the things that I really, you know, made an impact on me is, again, listening and speaking the right language. When I worked for the Israeli consulate, we were the first consulate to have a Latino affairs officer. She was a Mexican Jewish American, a Hebrexican, and we did programming in Spanish to Latino churches across the Southwest region, and did things like, we made a Day of the Dead altar, a ofrenda of Octavio Paz, who was a famous Mexican writer, a Nobel Prize winner, who was the first Mexican ambassador to Israel. And so we got pictures of Octavio Paz from the Israeli Foreign Ministry and made a Day of the Dead celebration for him. So that's, you know, it's about good listening. After I was working for the Israeli Foreign Ministry, I went on to become a journalist for a bit. I had a column with the Jerusalem Post called Tales of a Wandering Jew. I wrote about Jewish communities in far-flung places. I have a subsequent lecture, which I will give next month for Smile on Seniors, about Jewish communities in far-flung places. I won't get into too much of that stuff today, but really that was about telling the stories of different Jewish communities, you know, some that were growing by leaps and bounds, how they were prospering. You know, so there's Jewish communities in China, in Jamaica, Patagonia, Tijuana, India, all sorts of places, telling stories of Jewish communities in the twilight of their days, like in India, in Cochin, and how they're trying to maintain their Jewish heritage and culture. So really, that's an aspect to me of public diplomacy, is being able to tell the story of our people. I ended up, as I mentioned, got a degree in public diplomacy from the University of Southern California. My first degree was at Brandeis University. I have a bachelor's in Islamic and Middle Eastern studies focusing on Jewish communities in the world of Islam. I spent a lot of time working in the Muslim world. I'll talk a little bit about that later. But since went on to work, as Rabbi Levertov mentioned, with the Indian Ministry of External Affairs doing public diplomacy, Taiwan. And for the last 7 years prior to coming to Phoenix, I was working with the State Department, as he mentioned, running State Department cultural diplomacy programs. I first was the communications director for a small nonprofit called American Voices, which runs performing arts academies in countries in conflict. So I ran a performing arts academy in Iraq, teaching jazz and breakdance and symphony and theater in Iraq with, a whole performing arts academy, and being the first Jew that people in Iraq ever met, which is a whole nother story. We can talk about that later. We also ran the American Music Abroad program, which is the State Department's flagship music diplomacy program, taking different types of music, blues and bluegrass and Hawaiian music all around the world. I ended up going off on my own, started my own business called Levantine Public Diplomacy, where I was taking alumni from that program, connecting them with other embassies, and I ran a hip hop diplomacy program. Everything was going smashingly well. I was enjoying all of this. And then I found myself in Morocco. I was in Chefchaouen. This was in the summer of 2017. And if you don't know Chefchaouen is this beautiful city of blue where Jews who were escaping the Inquisition and found haven in North Africa, in Morocco, moved to. And they started painting their houses blue. And over time, the whole city painted their houses blue. It's this beautiful blue paradise in the Rif Mountains. And I was there and I turned on my computer and I saw Nazis marching down the streets in Charlottesville. And, all of this work I was doing abroad suddenly didn't matter, because if my own home community was being threatened, then, I couldn't be out saving the world if La Mancha was on fire. So that brought me back to work domestically. I figured my background in public diplomacy and media would be of service for the Jewish community. And this was just even more reinforced after the attack in Pittsburgh. That brought me here to Phoenix to be the executive director of the Jewish Community Relations Council. Now, mind you, before I came to Phoenix, I didn't have a fixed address for 7 years. I didn't live anywhere longer than 2 months for 7 years. But I gave up my nomadic lifestyle. I moved to Phoenix because this was an important time for the Jewish community and I wanted to be involved in this. So explaining what we do with the JCRC, we do kind of two major things. We do Jewish communal public diplomacy. We internally within the Jewish community, we work to make a more cohesive, collaborative Jewish community, especially during times of crisis. I help quarterback the crisis communications, the rapid response for the Jewish community. We serve as a bit of a press office for the Jewish community. So we manage the relationships with media. We manage the relationships to do something called flacking. Flacking is basically helping connect different parties to tell the stories of the Jewish community. So if there's something of interest that the Arizona Republic might be interested in the Jewish community, I might connect them with a program going on. So we work as a press office for the Jewish community. Externally, we do advocacy, interfaith outreach, and community bridge building on behalf of the Jewish community. So we work almost as a foreign ministry for the Jewish community. So we help communicate to other communities the issues that keep the Jewish community up at night. Anti-Semitism, BDS, threats to Israel, things that we feel in our kishkas. And by the same token, we help the Jewish community understand the issues that keep other communities up at night, issues of racism, issues of xenophobia, Islamophobia, issues of criminal justice reform. We help the Jewish community connect to civil society around us. And so we, as I mentioned, we almost serve as the foreign ministry of the Jewish community. So one of the things we do is we help project and use the soft power, the resources of the Jewish community, the institutions of the Jewish community to help the Jewish community strengthen civil society. So things like helping communicate programs like Jewish Free Loan to other communities and sharing that model that can be so important to help build other communities. Jewish Free Loan had connected with the African American community some years back to help build a Jewish free loan style program. And we helped further that connection and bring that connection onto the Latino community, connecting Jewish free loan with the Arizona Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. We help manage the relationships. And then more importantly, we help safeguard the Jewish community through the relationships with the faith community, with the security community, with the police department. I'm honored to sit on the Jewish Advisory Board with Rabbi Levertov, and we help communicate the issues that the Jewish community faces in terms of insecurity to the police department, to other partners in the security field. So we help manage those relationships of security. And then we also use help use the resources of the Jewish community, some of those security resources, because we have our own security resources, to help other communities. So, for example, we sit on the Asylum Coalition. We do work with a whole wide swath of community partners who work on the issue of asylum. Asylum is, it goes across the spectrum. You have everyone in Phoenix working on this, from the LDS Church to the Lutherans to the Jewish community, everyone. Last year, when there was a bigger issue of asylees being dropped off at the bus station here in the ground, these were people who had been processed through and were given asylum hearings, but were then just dumped on the side of the road to go onward. The International Rescue Committee opened a welcome center here in Phoenix to help take the asylees and send them onward. Well, when it opened, we did a tour of it, and I noticed very quickly that they had some security issues. So we in the Jewish community also have our issues with security. So we helped facilitate a meeting between some of the security personnel in the Jewish community to do an assessment and a walkthrough and do what's called target hardening, making sure that they had better access to security stuff. So using the resources of the Jewish community to help other communities around us. Also, as I mentioned, we fight anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. One of the things that happened after I first arrived here was there was the shooting in New Zealand at the mosques there. So we helped go to mosques here in Phoenix to help connect with the Muslim community, to share the support of the Jewish community. I went to the Friday prayer with Rabbi Bonnie Scharfman, who's on my board and on the board of the Arizona Faith Network, and Reverend Katie Sexton. And we helped get the Jewish community out to share the support to the Muslim community at that time after the shootings in New Zealand. Well, fast forward 6 weeks, there was the shooting at the Chabad in Poway, and the first people who reached out to us were from the Muslim community to share their support with us. And we've seen things like this during the attacks on the Jewish community, around the anti-Semitic attacks in Hanukkah of last year. We had the Muslim community reaching out to us, and we had the faith community also putting out a letter of support for the Jewish community in the face of anti-Semitism in the Arizona Republic. So this is, again, about relationships and managing those relationships to help protect the Jewish community. We also work on issues of criminal justice reform here in Arizona. We work with a wide swath of partners, from the ACLU to Americans for Prosperity, the Koch brothers. So we work on issues that really transcend political divides. These are issues that we come at from a nonpartisan angle, and really it's about the issues that they connect to the community. And we help educate the Jewish community on why these issues matter to us, in general. So I mentioned my role in cultural diplomacy. I was proud before COVID hit, when we could connect and get together. We were partners on some programs with the Jewish and African American communities. We ran some concerts with Pilgrim Rest Baptist Church, the Arizona Jewish Historical Society, and a number of synagogues. We did concerts related to Jewish and African American spiritual music, so Jewish spiritual music and gospel music. And we ran concerts and helped connect the Jewish community to share in these intangibles of the culture and the music and what have you. Unfortunately, we can't do that these days because of COVID, but we've been very active during this COVID season of helping other communities. So, for example, when COVID first kicked off and there was an increase of xenophobia and bigotry towards the Chinese community, we helped reach out to the Chinese community here to share the support of the Jewish community and communities around us. My parent organization, the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, got out in front on this one very early and was offering support for the Chinese community, and we did so as well. We took out advertisements in local Chinese newspapers with letters of support in Mandarin that the Jewish community would help stand up to the bigotry and xenophobia that the Chinese community faced. And we got other partners in the Latino community, African American community, faith community to reach out to these same Chinese partners and share with them their support as well. And then when things got a little worse, we helped connect them with different security outlets to make sure that they had access to know that if there were xenophobic incidents, they knew where to turn. Well, fast forward, when we were having issues of getting access to PPE equipment, the Chinese community had all sorts of access to PPE equipment. And so we were able to help facilitate through the Chinese community access for the Jewish community to have PPE equipment. So because of their thanks to us, is they said, hey, we can help you find these things. This is how we take care of each other. Another aspect of this during the COVID pandemic was we helped facilitate a transfer from the LDS community, the Mormons. The Mormons have a tremendous logistical supply network. And at the time, Jewish Family and Children's Services was having an issue getting access to baby diapers, baby formula, what have you, for their clients. And so we were able to help facilitate through our relationships from the LDS Church to donate a truckload of supplies for JFCS to help their clients. And so this is really about how we can use these relationships to help better civil society, help protect the Jewish community. And more recently, we just had a program related to this election season. As I mentioned, we're nonpartisan. We partnered with the Jewish News to host a program about how to make sure your ballot is counted. And we hosted the Arizona Secretary of State, Katie Hobbs, and the Director of All Voting is Local, Alex Gulata, it's a nonpartisan voting program. We ran a webinar to help share about how to make sure that you have access to get your ballot counted this election season. So that's a little bit about what we do in terms of Jewish communal public diplomacy. I'm glad to answer some questions about that, about any of the issues we deal with, and I will open that up. But before that, I'm going to get to, I need everyone to unmute themselves. Can we get everyone unmuted?
Gotta unmute themselves.
Can everybody unmute themselves? So we've got a birthday today. It is Rabbi Levi Levertov's birthday. And we should all sing him happy birthday before we move on to the question and answer session.
Okay.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to
you.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. It's really tough to sing happy birthday on Zoom.
I have some questions for you if we have some time. I have 4 birthday questions. I ask of everyone for their birthday, but we'll save that to see if anybody else has got some questions first.
Yeah, Levy, is this your second birthday this month?
Second birthday this month. We'll have to explain that after.
Is it your Hebrew birthday?
Is it not your birthday today?
It's the no, it's my secular calendar birthday. So my Jewish birthday was 2 days after Simchat Torah.
Okay.
What's the Hebrew day?
The Hebrew day is the 25th of Tishrei.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
But I take well wishes every day. All right. Anyone have any questions for Paul? Because I know that, first of all, he covered a lot of ground.
How does it feel to be 21, Rabbi?
Paul, how does it feel to feel 21? I know you asked it to me, but I'm directing it at Paul.
I wish I was still 21. No, actually, I'm glad I'm not 21. There's a great quote from Stranger in a Strange Land. Age doesn't offer wisdom, but at least gives perspective. So I'm happy with the perspective I'm at.
If anyone has any questions for Paul, let me know. I have a question. If not, what I'm going to do though is probably mute everyone back up, and then if you have a question, unmute yourself so we don't get feedback. Anyone have any questions? Now that everyone's back to mute, anyone have any questions?
Paula, you have a question, please.
Yes, what was your reaction and what did you do with the anti-Semitic signs that appeared on the ASU campus in Tempe a couple weeks ago?
Very good. That's a great question. So I worked directly with ASU Hillel on that. We helped do some triage to get them to report that to the correct authorities. We liaise. I do a lot of work with ASU Hillel and help advise them on such things. We did all the proper triage to get that reported. This was something that was outside of campus. We know who it was who put those things up. We keep tabs on them. They've been popping up from time to time, and we help advise and make sure that this is something that's handled appropriately on campus, that the right authorities at ASU are taking the proper precautions with this, and we help with that in a lot of ways.
Do you work with the ADL on that?
We do. We partner with the ADL on that. We work with different parties. We occupy some of the same space as the ADL, but they're full stop anti-Semitism and dealing with you know, the incidents. They have their Center for Extremism. We assist in such things. We work on such things. We help on such things. We partner on such things. My focus is more on the advocacy, interfaith outreach, and community bridge building, but we do a lot to fight anti-Semitism and work with them. But, you know, this is one of these things where all parties working together in the Jewish community help benefit and come from different angles.
Thank
So
you.
if they do know who did it, do they watch them enough that us Jews can feel
Yeah,
okay?
you can feel okay. These are losers. They put up a sign on a banner before, you know, these are not the smart. They wouldn't get into ASU. They don't go to ASU. I would be more concerned if these were ASU students. These are most certainly not ASU students. These are losers. The authorities are well aware of who it is, and there is, you know, it's complicated. There's not exactly a hate crime statute in Arizona, but there are ways of, oh, I see a cat. There's a cat on the screen. That
Probably has a question for you.
Yeah. There are ways of aggravating sentences based on hate crimes. And so when these people go to trial, they're going to find that they're you know, it's not just trespassing, it's not just vandalism, because when you do something that's, you know, a hate crime, that increases sentencing. So yeah, you know, they'll get theirs, don't worry. But yeah, you know, I'd be more concerned if those were ASU students. They're not ASU students, they're losers.
Question, and if anyone has any other questions, definitely unmute, but do all Jcrcs work in the same capacity, or is it based off of whoever is the director?
Yeah, so there are about 125 Jcrcs across the country. I'd say probably about 80 to 85% are part of the Jewish Federation. The rest are independent. My Jcrc is independent. It is, I'd say it's just me, but I also just recently took on a fellow. I have a young college graduate named Ilana Krill who just joined me as a communications and public diplomacy fellow. I'm enjoying getting to train the next generation of Jewish communal leadership through this fellowship. Jcrcs differ from city to city, place to place in what issues they take on. I mean, everything's local. You have to work in a local context. Some Jcrcs are staffs of 10 people. I wish I had a staff of 10 people, but I do the work of a few people, so we're okay. It really depends on which is the place and what kind of work they do. We work with the JCPA, which is our parent organization, and they kind of set some of the direction in terms of criminal justice reform, asylum issues, and then we work on some of these things locally. But our most basic, you know, and Jcrcs differ in what they focus on. Some deal more with issues on campus, some deal more with BDS, some deal more with political advocacy. We, you know, based on what we focus on, you know, ultimately it's using community relations to help fight anti-Semitism and strengthen civil society around us. And we use things like public diplomacy and soft power to help, you know, be a force multiplier for our work. I'd like to say we hit well above our weight being one and a half people, but we get there and we help, you know, really help the Jewish community using strategic communications, using the background that I mentioned, some of these things like public diplomacy to amplify the voice of the Jewish community.
I had a question.
Please.
If you screw up, I'm not being cute here. Screw up, who do you have to answer to? I mean, you said you're independent. So if you're part of an organization and there's somebody over you, they can say you're out. Who was the one who can call you down?
Yeah, I have a board. I have a board of directors. I have a tremendous board. My board chair is Adam Goodman. On my executive committee, some people you might know, Tim Eckstein, Rabbi Bonnie Scharfman, who else is Alan Zychek, and Rich Casper's ex officio on my board. Who else would you know? Erica Newberg's on my board, Carol Consalvo. I have a board of directors that I work with. real all-star board here in the Jewish community. Aaron Pratt's on my board. And so we come at it from a lot of different angles. We come at it from a lot of different perspectives. But I answer to my board, and ultimately we answer to the Jewish community. We are part of this community. We answer to the Jewish community. We help take care of this Jewish community. So I answer directly to my board, but my board, my organization, ultimately we answer to the Jewish community.
Oh, because, every once in a while, you may not mean it, but you can put your foot in your mouth. I mean, those things happen. So
it does, yeah.
Not with Paul. It happens, but not with Paul.
So, other questions, please.
Have you found any resistance from other communities when you reach out because you're Jewish? Meaning the same thing that people are always worried about.
That's a good question. I haven't. It helps that I speak a number of languages and have a lot of experience in a lot of places. And I'd like to think I'm good at figuring out what are the issues that are meaningful to other communities and where we can be involved. And again, that comes to listening. I haven't found any communities that haven't been receptive. We connect with different communities in different ways. The ways we connect with the evangelical community is different than the ways we connect with the Mormon communities, is different than the ways we connect with Latino community. So it's being cognizant of, what issues matter to each community and where we engage with that. And, really figuring, there's going to, there's one community, the neo-Nazi community, we haven't, there's not too much receptiveness there, but, but.
Have you tried?
I can't say I have. So
is there, I don't even know where is that community to reach out to, but
there's some locations that it's a little larger. Let's say there's an old saying from William Lloyd Garrison: with reasonable men I will reason, with honorable men I will plead, but with tyrants I will give no quarter, because it will surely be wasted breath. I'm probably not going to do a lot of outreach. I'm not going to do any outreach to the Nation of Islam. I'm not going to do any outreach to neo-Nazis. I'm not going to do any outreach because it's a waste of time. Nation of Islam's not coming over to have bagels with me. Neither are the neo-Nazis. I don't need to I've got limited bandwidth. But for anybody else, I'm always happy to break bread and understand where the issues that affect their community. Yes, sir.
How are you funded?
We are completely independent. We receive donations from the community. We receive grants. Thankfully, I'm a decent grant writer. So thankfully, I was able to take on a communications fellow. We received a very generous grant from the Molly Blank Fund. We've received grants from the Jewish Community Foundation. We received grants from different sources, and thankfully I've got a very generous board, and there have been some very generous donors in the community that support our work. So there had been a Jcrc that was part of the Federation until 2008, and it was shuttered with the economic downturn. But also one of the reasons it was shuttered was it was hard to make any, since this can be a sometimes politically divided community, the different sides didn't always agree on the issues. And so one of the reasons why we were reformed as being independent was to let us have a little distance that we can work on issues without having the political divisions stop our work as quickly. We are always cognizant of political issues, but we really try and come at things from a nonpartisan issue, and find that the deeper you get into some of these issues, you realize that they span political divides, religious divides, and we work with a variety of partners on these issues, so that, like criminal justice reform, you might think is a liberal issue. It's not. You have, as I mentioned, the ACLU, Americans for Prosperity, the Koch brothers network, working very deeply on this here in Arizona. We partner with both of them to do work. As I mentioned, the asylum issue, we don't get into the politics of immigration. We figure out how to help those who have been released from, asylum and have onward hearings. We figure out how to help them by connecting with the Maricopa County Medical Society, make sure that, the people who are doing the medical treatments have, access to good doctors. We try and find the nonpartisan, non-political ways of coming at issues. So does that help? Okay, I saw a question in the chat screen. I'm going to address that one.
Yeah, is that the one that you saw from Ellen?
Who or which group hired you?
Yeah, Ellen, was that answered by his question, by his answer to Stan, or did you have more about that?
I can share a little bit more about that. So as I mentioned, I was looking to get back involved domestically after many years working, abroad. I hadn't lived in the States in years. When I was looking for a position to figure out how I could be of service to the Jewish community, my work with the Jcrcs when I was working for the Israeli Foreign Ministry really came to the fore. As I mentioned, sending Ethiopian Israeli filmmakers to New Orleans to connect with the Baptist churches. I knew it was that kind of domestic public diplomacy and community relations work that I'd been doing abroad. It was an opportunity to do it at home. And so this was something that I saw a job posting on jewishjobs.org and applied for it. And I've been here almost 2 years. It'll be 2 years in January. And I have enjoyed my time here in Phoenix. As I mentioned, I didn't live anywhere longer than 2 months for 7 years. I didn't even have a smartphone until I moved to Phoenix. This is all very strange for me, but I've enjoyed being here as long as the summer ends at some point.
As long as the summer ends at some point.
Yeah. Other questions, please. I am game for questions.
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy.
Okay. I was wondering if you do any work with the schools at all as to educating them, for things that are important to the Jewish community, the public schools?
So what we do, we put out a calendar every year that we send to all of the principals and superintendents of all of the Jewish holidays and how to understand, when these holidays take place, giving space for the Jewish students to not have tests on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. So that's one thing we do. We've been involved in the work on getting the Holocaust education to be mandated here in Arizona. I assisted the Arizona Teaches the Holocaust, partnered with Phoenix Holocaust Association on such things. So we have been involved in that and help support them on this. I don't work directly in the education space because that's not quite what I do, but we find ways of making sure that, both the teaching of the Holocaust, we're working on that and helping in the political realm, using our relationships with local, political figures to help push that. And also, connecting on when there's issues of anti-Semitism on campus, we help connect with Hillel and other partners to help give them advice. So, or if there's issues of anti-Semitism in schools, either depending on what happened, either the ADL or I will reach out, or maybe we'll both reach out together. But, really we're about partnerships and force multiplication on this. And we don't have to do everything. We can help amplify others' voices or, help maximize what they're doing. So yeah, so in an ancillary fashion, yes. And in some direct fashion.
Stan, did you have another question?
Me, no. Thank
Paula.
you very much. I didn't know anything about the Community Relations Council.
Well,
So
that's
this
why
is
we have Paul on.
fascinating. This is
why I'm here.
Paula, did you have a follow-up?
I had a question that the signs that I brought up at Tempe, that was
Yeah.
obviously anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
Other signs that could be posted around town that maybe don't come outright as anti-Semitic, where do we question those?
That's quite a hypothetical. Can you give me some more ideas of what you're talking about? Like, I mean, if it's not anti-Semitic, then
We saw some signs put up in our neighborhood, and it's all right to put a sign up in the neighborhood and whatever, but when they're put up at every single corner, 4 signs on every single corner, and then we live all the way north, almost in Carefree, Boulders. Then as we're driving down, we see those same signs are all the way down to the 101. We question that.
what kind of signs? Can you share more of what the signs say?
Yeah, I can even show it to you. It's for a lost dog. Okay, which that I understand, but a lost dog from the Boulders to the 101, a lost dog would never make it that far. Let me just tell a little bit more about this. Then 2 weeks later, we're down in Phoenix. We see almost the identical sign, only with a different phone number. And not only on one street corner, but on every street corner for blocks and blocks. And that kind of made me wonder. Now, when we saw the signs up here, my husband, we waited 2 weeks and he called to find out if they found the dog because it's for a lost dog. And the woman called him back because it was an answering machine, called back and said, no, we haven't found the dog yet. We're hoping to find it. And my husband said, okay, I hope you find your dog. And when you do, just take the signs down.
That's not quite an issue I would get engaged in. There's not quite the connection to the Jewish community on that one. If they put up some anti-Semitic stuff on.
The day later, he got a threatening call, a real threatening call, accusing him, how dare you call us and ask us if we found our dog. I mean, it was like really, really bad.
Yeah.
But my gut told me there's something else behind these signs. Maybe not anti-Semitism, but something is behind these signs.
Conspiracy.
I really don't know what to say on that one. I haven't seen the signs. You know, I don't know what to say. I'll be honest. I'm not really sure of the case. I don't think this one quite crosses my plate. Okay. I think probably best just to leave it be. You know, a lost dog's an emotional issue, and obviously these people are very concerned for their dog and hurt that it hasn't come back. And I probably wouldn't bother them on the signs right now. Let them find their dog and ask them to take, you know, when you see a sign up that says we found the dog, then you ask them to take down the signs. But I'd probably let that one be.
With a month, it's been over a month. I'm sure the coyotes have enjoyed dinner.
Any other questions?
Well, I guess, where do you not get involved? Besides for signs like that? Meaning in things that you would consider Jewish public diplomacy. Meaning, where's your line?
That's a good question. That's so sometimes I do a lot of cat herding and babysitting. Sometimes it's not so much not getting involved, it's keeping everyone calm and not overdoing something or not doing an own goal. There's sometimes where we get very concerned about an issue and want to make an immediate response, and sometimes that's not the right response. It's sometimes better to ignore something or monitor something longer. So sometimes it's a matter of keeping, you know, or for example, for ASU and Hillel, I do a lot of work to make sure that the adults don't get involved on campus. We help keep things localized. So helping empower the students to take, to take up the advocacy work and not the adults coming down to campus to tell them what to do, because we need to train the next generation of Jewish leadership. And so sometimes it's keeping people back, you know, making sure that the students are empowered to handle something. And if we need to step in, we can, but sometimes it's making sure that that things stay localized, things stay small, things stay quiet, you know, or monitoring things until it actually, you know, becomes a bigger issue. So I think that's it's a matter of discretion and you know, using diplomacy and understanding when is the right time to deal with an issue and who's the right party to deal with an issue. You know, I worked for now an Israeli ambassador. One of the things she taught me is you always localize an issue. You always make sure that, you know, the local party is reacting, and you only amplify things when necessary. So I think that's an aspect of our work, is knowing what the right response is. We're trying.
I thought of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict last night. I was on a meeting with the police chief, and they mentioned that when all of the issues were going on with the police departments, they realized that they weren't getting out the positive message or their message fast enough.
Yeah.
And that's what you think about, you know, Israel's issue with the international audience. I mean, there are some very good videos that come out from the Palestinian side. I'm just using that in their conflict. And Israel's not fast in the sense of putting out the true story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of what your role, in a sense. I don't know if that's correct, but.
No, that is. I mean, you know, you always have to be proactive with your public diplomacy. In some ways, Israel's very good at its public diplomacy. I was an early adopter of social media, was very good at doing public diplomacy outside of the conflict. So, you know, it's complicated. Israeli public diplomacy is complicated. Some things it does very well, some things it doesn't do as well. But that we could have a whole discussion and lecture about Israeli public diplomacy. That's, you know, some things having worked in Israeli public diplomacy, there are some things that Israel does very well in terms of public diplomacy, relationships, early adopter, and there's other things that it doesn't do as well. We can have a long discussion on Israeli public diplomacy on another one. Yes, I see another question.
the question I have, you say about diplomacy, but a lot of the issues are big splash in our American papers of what the Palestinians do. And then on page 25, there'll be a little blurb about Israel. So it's partial news. They are giving one view. They're not giving a equal view of the same issue.
Well, yeah, there's on some levels, Israel does better. Like there's press officers. There's a number of consulate press officers across the country that help connect Israel's story in media, connecting with the editorial departments. There's not a lot of international news that comes across anyways. You don't see a lot of stories about Israel in the Arizona Republic, and when you do, it's an AP story. It's not something that the Arizona Republic was writing itself. There's, I will say the Arizona Republic's editorial department is I would say relatively pro-Israel. The editorial editor, Phil Boaz, I would say is a friend to Israel. In terms of the news that we see, we don't see a lot of news about Israel here in Arizona. There could always be more, but part of that is also being proactive in telling your story. I don't think Israel always is as proactive as it should be in telling its own story. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But that's, we don't get a tremendous amount of international news here in Arizona, not enough. But
when we get the story in the American paper, it'll be a big splash. 10 Palestinians were killed at the checkpoint, but they don't give the story about what happened before the.
So yeah, no, trust me, I did media and public diplomacy during the Second Intifada. I had to deal with this a lot when I was a press officer for the Israeli consulate. What I would say is this, is most Americans don't have you have one of the most complicated regions and issues in the world, and you have an American population that doesn't know much about what goes on there. Americans don't really pay a lot of attention to international news to begin with. Newspapers are imperfect when it comes to telling, the history of the situation, the full story, because they're looking at instantaneous, what happened yesterday, what happened today, not what happened 6 months ago, what happened a year ago. I would say, there's ways of doing deeper dives. There's ways of getting your story out. And part of public diplomacy is Israel needs to be better at telling its story outside of the conflict, or does a better job with the press office, press officers. But in some ways, we are better served. Like there's no equivalent of a Palestinian press officer, a Palestinian consulate. In some ways, Israel does a lot more and has a lot better connection to the media than the Palestinian side. So I'm not as I think I'm a little more, having worked in this field, I think it's not as bad as you might think. But that's a much longer discussion about Israel and the media. It's not perfect. It's not always great. It's sometimes very, very frustrating. But in part, it's, you don't have the depth in newspapers to really get the full story. And so we have to be educators ourselves. We have to be ambassadors ourselves on behalf of Israel and help educate, other parties. And I do that, in some of our work with the Jcrc, we help make sure and connect Israel.
You made such a good point that in effect, we really all are the Jcrc, meaning not working for you, but in the sense we walk as a Jew, talk as a Jew, live as a Jew, and that's what people see.
Exactly.
And judge
who you are. Yeah.
Any other questions? Well, then I'll wrap it up. Thank you very much.
I have 4
you
questions.
Have my question.
I have 4 questions for your birthday boy. This is what I ask everyone.
First, let me just thank you. So I just wanted, and I'll stay on. I'll answer. Hopefully, maybe I'll play diplomacy. But thank you very much for your presentation. And just so everyone knows, Paul is coming back on in December with another part of a recap and really explaining and sharing his different travels that he's done in the sense of visiting the outlying Jewish communities and more. Beyond that, we'll send that out in December. For dates for next week, I did want to just make sure everyone's aware. Friday, we have a local artist. Her name is Jenna Raskin-Moranis. On Monday is Gordon Sims, who's the director, or he's speaking on behalf of Sojourner, which is a domestic violence shelter here in Phoenix. On Wednesday, we have an author, Daniel Chertoff, who is the author of the book Palestine Post, an eyewitness account of the birth of Israel, based on the letters of his father, which is a pretty good read. And if you get your hands on that, you can buy it on Amazon. And then on Friday the 30th, we'll have Moshe Buchspan from Red Rocks Music Festival with some beautiful music. Again, those are just the dates. If you go to our website, sosaz.org/virtual, you can see the upcoming full list all the way through December. We just added that so you can see further out. And again, please do share it with friends. Thank you again, Paul. I will take your questions now.